welcome, good afternoon. Welcome to another session, another program in our Civics Academy series. Today we have Eric Miller, who's the Finance and Administrative Services Director with the City of Beloit, and Lauri Maldonis, who is the Property Appraiser, and they're going to dig into the property tax assessments, reevaluations, and those things. And this year, in the past 2 years, this has kind of been one program, but there was a lot of interest to get a little bit deeper and to hear more about it. So instead of doing it 2 hours in one session, we have a two-part. And this is the first part of the two-part, public finance, and November 20th is the next session in this program. You have a flyer, it's on our website. And then on December 18th, Jason Stein from the Wisconsin Policy Forum will be here to talk about a new data tool that's being developed in conjunction with the school district of Beloit. And then we have spring dates and presenters that we'll be having there. We have some other programs on October 31st. We have a couple, kind of a panel coming to talk about the DPI report cards and the changes and some of how they assess that and those things. And just to make sense of it for us, and everyone around the state is trying to make sense of that, especially as you look forward to long-term trends and getting a grip on that. And then there'll be more spring dates and presenters after the first of the year. I know we have at least one in here with the school district. Bob Chady's here, and he'll be presenting after the first of the year on the school district. So lots of exciting things, great program. I want to thank obviously the Beloit Public Library, but the Beloit Public Library Foundation. The State Line Community Foundation has sponsored, for a while now, has been sponsoring a sponsor of the lunches that we've had. And then of course the City of Beloit, as well as the Community Academy, merged with the Know Your Local Government series to now be the Civics Academy. So this is growing thanks to all of you attending, and thanks of course to our presenters that are helping us make sense of local government and county government and state government and all the things associated with that. So now I'll turn it over to Eric Miller.
All right, thank you. This is working. I assume everybody can hear me just fine. All right, good deal. So thank you, Nick. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for being here on an afternoon as beautiful as this. To take some time out of your day to learn just a little bit more, maybe about what we do in public finance. So, as Nick said, I'm Eric Miller. I'm the Finance and Administrative Services Director. I have Lauri Maldonis with me also today. As we mentioned, this is Public Finance Part 1, and it's Part 1 because there is a Part 2, as Nick mentioned. And so I know you will all be just waiting on pins and needles for next November 20th, or this coming November 20th, where you'll be back to hear Part 2. I won't give any spoiler alerts, so we'll just continue on. We're just going to do a brief introduction of ourselves, and then we'll get a little bit deeper into the presentation. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Lauri for an introduction.
Okay, hi everyone. So I'm Lauri Maldonis, the Property Appraiser for the city. I have been with the city for about 3 years. Prior to coming here, I was a real estate appraiser for 29 years with my primary focus on commercial property appraisal. But after several years of a demanding schedule, I just decided a change was in order, and I landed here, and I'm very excited about that. You know, one of the favorite things about my job is truly meeting Beloit residents and community members every week. You know, it's just been a great experience. I've met a lot of really wonderful people. I also enjoy the combination of office work and field work. I get to get out every week and look at properties, talk to people, enjoy our city. So I sort of fell into my prior appraisal career, and because my degree was not specific to that, I took numerous appraisal courses through the Appraisal Institute, and I worked under the guidance of a really excellent appraiser to obtain my general appraiser certification, which I still maintain. My appraisal background met most of the requirements for this position, but after starting here, I also took additional coursework specific to mass appraisal, and I have the property appraiser certification from the Department of Revenue. My responsibilities kind of broadly include data collection and reporting, property listing and valuation, but more specifically, I perform the residential property inspections and reviews, and I assist in that valuation. I also perform the agricultural reviews that we do annually. At the current time, our contracted assessor is primarily responsible for the commercial property inspections and those reviews and valuation, but I hope to, assist more with that in the future since I do have a strong background there. I also assist in the appeal process, meeting with property owners during the open book period. I verify all of the sales that occur in the city annually to determine if they are market level, arm's length transactions that we can use for valuation purposes. And I'm responsible for reporting all of that information to the Department of Revenue. I assist in the preparation of various reports for the Department of Revenue and for local and county departments. And of course, I assist the public with questions they have about property. I think one of the challenges or biggest challenges with the assessor's office today is gaining access to properties for inspections. We reach out to residents primarily by mail, requesting an opportunity to inspect properties for various reasons. One being when properties sell, we ask to come in and take a look, or if a building permit has been issued for work being done. But we're finding that the response rate is pretty low. For sale reviews specifically, if I get 15% of people to respond, I'm pretty lucky. And it's really important, even though we have other sources of data like the multiple listing services, it's really important to be able to get in and see the property because that's where we're getting the most accurate information. I also often meet people who are a little nervous to talk with the assessor or the assessment staff. And while we don't always say what that property owner wants to hear, I really want to encourage those questions. I want people to feel comfortable to ask those questions that they have. So I think programs like this, provide a great opportunity to open up that dialogue and give us a chance to explain to people that, the primary goal of the assessor's office is to make sure that properties are assessed accurately so that a property owner is paying only their fair share of property taxes. The added challenge though, with that is, with conversations about assessment and mass appraisal is that it's really a complex complex process. And there are few quick answers. But hopefully today through this program and question and answer period later, we can at least answer a few questions for all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauri. So, again, my name is Eric Miller. I have been with the City of Beloit for 20 years now. I started as the finance director in June of 2014, so just over 10 years ago now. I graduated from the University of Toledo with a Bachelor's of Business Administration, and then that did have an emphasis in accounting, not actually in finance. So accounting was my first love. I then went shortly after and got my CPA certificate. And then I worked in both public and private sector in the healthcare industry. And so that's where I really got started in public finance, was in the hospital that I first worked in before I came to the city. My primary responsibilities are for, as you can see, finance, accounting, clerk treasurer, risk management, and the assessor's office. Basically, second floor City Hall is where my department is located. And then, of course, challenges and opportunities for me. Levy limits is always a big challenge for anybody in public finance. And then the reliance on state aids is an issue, and it has been for many, many years. One of the opportunities we have is the casino development that should be coming here, breaking ground shortly, I think later this month. So that's one opportunity that the city has to kind of grow an additional revenue stream. As we move along through the presentation, I'm perfectly fine if people, have questions at that time. They can also wait till the end. That works for me too. I'll look around and see if anybody has questions at times. Otherwise, we can wait until the end. Whatever you feel like doing is fine with me. Okay, so we're going to talk about the property tax bill. Many of you have seen this. This is a standard property tax bill. There's nothing really fancy about this bill in particular. I just randomly chose it. Took the name and the property ID number off of it. Confidentiality reasons, of course. So anyways, this is pretty basic, pretty standard. I'll go through each of the different sections of the bill. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail on each of the sections. But by statute, we have to have the property tax bill out into the mail the third Monday of December. We have to have it done by then. That's when, prior to that, we'll get all the different levies from all the different taxing jurisdictions to put the bill together in conjunction with Rock County. We actually pay the bill to Rock County. The City of Beloit issues the bill, but we don't collect the money. It goes to Rock County. All of that money then gets deposited into an account that the city then ultimately has control over that cash as we then later distribute that money at certain times to the different taxing jurisdictions. And those different time frames are right here. The City of Beloit allows 4 payments of the tax bill. You can pay it in 1, you can pay it in 2, 3, no more than 4. And when you do pay it in installments, you just have to make sure that you are hitting the minimum amount due on the due date. Because if you miss it and you're not paying it, it basically becomes due. Okay, so then you're gonna pretty much have to pay it all. So then you start getting all these fees and we don't want that. So those are important dates that we need to make sure that you're hitting when making your tax payment. This section here is empty. But that would have something in there if you had a delinquent, say, utility bill, or if you had been written orders from code enforcement and didn't take care of those orders and then were issued a citation and didn't pay those. So any of those unpaid type of things that we have the statutory ability to roll to the tax bill, that's where that would show up. Special assessments are also included in there. Would be in that particular area of the tax bill. Those are also applied, if you make a payment, those are applied first. So it takes care of those items that roll to the tax bill first before it even starts to apply to your outstanding property tax. So somebody could say, well, you know what, they roll into my tax bill, I'm not paying that, I'm just gonna pay my taxes. Not really, because as soon as you make a payment, it's going to go toward that outstanding liability first, and then you're going to start seeing those fees we just talked about a little while ago start to accumulate on your bill. You don't really have the opportunity to say, I'm only applying it to my tax bill. It actually gets applied in a certain order with the county. Yes, sir?
So, is that listed anywhere when a person receives that? I mean, does it actually tell them that that is going to happen? Because otherwise, you're not negotiating with Beloit in good faith. That's a huge important thing, especially if you're assessing it to somebody who's over 65 years of age or something. They thought they paid their property tax, and you have to put it off somewhere else. Are they informed in advance?
You are notified of anything that you're getting rolled to the tax bill.
Yes, but when you pay your tax bill, you're paying your tax bill, you're not paying the assessments and all the other things. Are you? I mean, the general common knowledge of people is they're paying the tax bill.
Well, they're paying the amount that's due, not their tax bill. So if something got rolled to tax, that becomes a lien on the property. So now you're paying what's due, which is technically a part of that property. So am I writing you a letter that explicitly states that if you don't pay the full amount in the 4 installments, that it's only going to apply to the outstanding lien? No. That's not my responsibility to do that. That was your responsibility to make payment on the things that were owed prior to us even rolling it to the tax bill, which you've then been notified multiple times through like a utility bill. So, yeah. So that's where that would show up. And then the last part on this particular area is down at the bottom here. This would have, if there was a referendum that got passed, this area would be filled in with all of this information to the taxpayer saying what jurisdiction levied that additional tax, what is that additional tax, how much is being applied to that particular property, and then what year does that tax then come off? How long are we paying that particular referendum that was passed? So that's where that would show up there.
It only shows up for the 1 year though, right? I mean, it would show up.
No, it would show up for every year that you're levying that additional amount.
Didn't we do something with Blackhawk with that year on there?
If there was a levy that was passed, a referendum that was passed, that would show up.
It just, every year it shows up?
It would show up until the year that it comes off. Yep. It's just a way that, kind of to your point, that then you're seeing what else am I paying for in addition to what the normal tax levy by statute would be. Well, I then went out to the public and said, well, what else, this is more money that I'm asking for you to pay for. This is how much I'm asking for, and this is how much you're paying on your particular property.
Not to suggest, but if the school district of Beloit were to have an operational referendum that would be approved by the voters,
Yes.
that's where that information would show up.
Yeah.
And then it would appear there for the length of that period of time that question authorized that override.
Yeah, I believe either Turner or Clinton had a referendum, so if I would have pulled a bill that would have had one of those tax school district jurisdictions, it would have shown up down there.
And it may or may not reflect what, like, it might say down there, my taxes are $400 higher until 2038. And if I compare this year to last year, your taxes went down by $40.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was created by the legislature to penalize schools for passing referendum. That's what it's created for, and it's not accurate in what it tells.
Well, it's not shocking that something that's, okay. Point taken. Any other questions on this part of the? No? All right, so the next portion is the top half of what we saw up there. And this directly relates to the topic that's later on in the presentation, where we're talking about the assessment of your property. And so that very top line is the assessed value. And so when you see assessed value, that means that that is the amount that was assessed by the local assessor. That was done on the local level, unless it's a manufacturing property. But so we're talking kind of about this residential property. The second line is the fair market value or equalized value. So you can kind of use those interchangeably, fair market, equalized. And that is a number that actually comes from the state of Wisconsin every year. And then we have kind of a little interactive session here. If you want to take out your phone calculators and do it, if you don't want to, that's perfectly fine. But how we come up with the assessment ratio, and see, I'm a math kind of nerd guy. So when I find cool little things in a PowerPoint, I like to use them. And so this is the first time I've ever done something like this. So you take the assessed value and you divide it by the market value, and you should get that number. Okay, you should get that number. So that's how the assessment ratio is determined. It's applied to every single property across the board in the city of Beloit. Okay, we have to do that. It's what we have to do. So and sometimes, like when I was talking about manufacturing properties, we only get the equalized value from the state, and then we have to what's called equate that number back to an assessed value. So all we're doing is multiplying that equalized value times that assessment ratio, and that comes up with a local assessed number. That's how we get the manufacturing assessed values in the city. Okay. So, so we come up with an assessment ratio. What does the assessment ratio mean? Okay, it means that for the market value of the city of Beloit, we are valued on the local level at 87.92% of market value. So undervalued. So in other words, you're paying a property tax that's really less on a property that for less amount than what the value of it is on the open market. Okay, that's what that's telling us. Now, this is last year's levy payable this year in 2024, so that value is as of January 1 of 2023. Okay, so we're almost 2 years past the valuation date. And that's by statute. January 1 is the valuation date, it's just the way it works. So that 88% is the reason why in 2024, we did do another reval, okay? Because we need to make sure that we're capturing that value that's out there. The very last box on the upper right is a number there. Well, what's that number? And that is all of the levies of all of the taxing jurisdictions that were on the first page of the bill. So all we're doing is adding up all of the tax levies, dividing it by the assessed value to come up with a rate, and that's called a mill rate. So you have some people call it a tax rate, some people call it a mill rate. When I say tax rate, I generally am talking about the local City of Beloit tax rate. If I use the word mill rate, that's an all-inclusive, all-jurisdictional rate. That's kind of the way that I use those phrases or terms. So you can see that when you add up all of those numbers, you come up with that number just in a decimal form up in the upper right. Now, why is it in decimal form? It's because we pay per 1,000 of assessed value. So if you divide that number by 1,000, you'll get the 0.016. Okay, it's just the way that it shows up on the bill. Yeah.
Isn't there also a law that you have to be within, that assessment ratio can't be less than 90% for more than 3 years or something like that?
Yep, and I have that on a slide when we start talking about the reval, but yes, it's 10%. It's either way 10% though, lesser or greater.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes?
The school credit.
Well, it's funny you should ask that. Whoops. So, the last box on the bill up at the top, the lower right, 26613, that's the school credit, okay? So, interactive exercise again. So if you take the 185,700 of assessed value and you divide that by 1,000, because remember it's per 1,000 of assessed value, and you multiply it by the 1.4332 or 11, you'll get 26613. Okay, that's the tax credit for the school. Okay, so it basically takes this school credit number right here that we get from the state of Wisconsin. They tell us what that number is. We then get that and essentially divide it by the assessed value to come up with a per 1,000 of assessed value number. That's a direct credit, essentially, from the school district. I know I've got 2 school district personnel in the back. It doesn't really make them all that happy. However, that's just, sorry guys, that's just the way it is. It doesn't really impact the city at all. It impacts more the school districts than it does the city.
It impacts more the property owner than it does the school.
Which is true, yeah. So it is a direct credit to the property owner. I mean, that's a fact. So I mean, this individual would be paying $266 more in taxes had they not gotten the credit. Unfortunately, it just doesn't add additional dollar spending to the school district. It's a net wash essentially for the city. I've got 2 questions. Yes?
Okay, so I'll just say, that tax credit, the school levy tax credit from the state, it's part of the state's record investment in public education. You'll hear that, you've heard that the past couple of years. School districts don't get any of that money. That simply flows to reduce the property tax burden paid by property owners. Why it's called the school levy tax credit, because it's applied to the school district levy, but it doesn't provide us any new money.
Is it the same for all districts, even that one that gets all that money, which one's that Shorewood or no? I don't know, it's that one, there's one over on the, lake, anyway.
It is not, so the formula essentially treats the school levy tax credit inversely to that of equalization aid. So districts that receive high equalization aid typically receive low school levy credit amounts. Districts that receive low or no state equalization aid get very high school levy tax credit amounts.
Okay.
Well, I assume that's because Brookfield was tired of paying very high.
Equalization aid flows to school districts, levy credits flow to municipalities. Property wealthy municipalities get more property tax relief from school levy credits. So Brookfield, whatever municipalities are there, make out way better from levy credits than the city of Beloit. Property taxpayers in the city of Beloit.
It's confusing.
We should do an hour on that alone.
They will.
I have, and we'll do it again.
Yeah, they will. And that's where the city's kind of person can be like, okay, unfortunately, that's not my deal. And I'm kind of glad it's not my deal. So anyway, that kind of rounds out the top portion of the property tax bill. So this middle section of the bill really is designed to highlight the amount of state aid that each of the local taxing jurisdictions receive. Okay, so it's a fair amount of state aids that collectively we get, and so if not for those state aids, you would be paying a significantly higher amount of property tax, because that really is essentially tax relief. Okay. And so if you would take that 95,000, I think there's a pointer around here somewhere. Oh, that didn't work. It doesn't matter. Right here. 95 million. If you take the 95 million and divide that by our total assessed values, and that's going to give you a proportionate share per basically dollar of assessed value, and multiply it by that 185.7 that we were looking at for the value of this property. That's essentially the value of the state aids that would be related to this property, which I didn't want to do the interactive calculation on this one. I'll just tell you what it is. It's $6,788. The total tax bill was $2,800. The tax break you get from the state aids is $6,700, almost $6,800. So it's significant. It's a significant amount of money. So at this point, any questions on the tax bill?
Well, do we want to just say that Beloit is the most heavily aided city in the state of Wisconsin?
I mean, I can't explicitly state that, but I mean, it's a lot.
It's close.
I mean, it's high. I know that.
What was that lottery and gaming credit? We don't have it yet, right, or is that?
So we get it.
Oh. we
It's
didn't
part
have
of the lottery system that's run through the state. Yeah. So the first dollar credit and lottery credit literally are just reductions of your tax burden. If we kind of looked back here at this highlighted blue section, so where you come up with those installment payments, if you basically take the amount that's due, subtract out the first dollar credit, divide it by 4, that's your normal bi-monthly payment. But then you take that lottery and gaming credit off the top, the very first payment that's due. That's why the first one is due $604. That's why the other ones are a little bit higher, because you're taking that one payment right off the top. Otherwise, it's pretty much just a flat divide by 4. Any other questions before we move on to info on the reval? Okay.
Eric, just real quick.
Yeah.
And I know this answer, but
Yes.
I can't tell you how many times it gets asked of me.
Yep.
Property taxes only apply to residential properties, right? So.
That is 100% false.
What?
I know, it's shocking.
Right.
Yeah, it gets applied to all non-tax exempt properties. Whether you're commercial, manufacturing, residential, ag, doesn't matter, it's all the
So
same.
I get the phone calls and the complaints, and
Yep.
then mid-December through mid-January.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's the same tax rate too, I mean, it just gets applied.
What are tax exempt properties?
So you could have churches that can be tax exempt. You have to apply to be tax exempt, believe it or not. You don't just automatically become exempt. So there's a process that we go through in the assessor's office. And then you apply to be tax exempt. We take a look at what the use of that property is. Just because a church owns it or a school district owns it, doesn't necessarily mean it's just automatically exempt. But school districts would be exempt, churches, some of the hospital or some hospital or some nonprofit type agencies would be tax exempt. So that's kind of the main list of stuff. Okay, so why and how do we do revals? So what is a reval? A reval is simply we're trying to capture the value that the market says the value of the property is. It's really that simple. But why do we do it? Because we have to, right? It's state statute. It tells us that we have to do it. So Laura had asked a question earlier about when would we have to do it? Well, you have to do a reval if your value isn't within 10% plus or minus of that equalized value at least one time in a 5-year period of time. So there's a slide we're going to get to in a little bit, and you'll see where it was going to happen, no matter what, because we were starting to fall outside of that range for too long. And when that happens is the state pretty much comes in and says, you're going to do this. And if you don't do it, we're going to do it. And then, oh, by the way, you're going to pay us to do it. So we do it. We did it in 2022, and that was the first time we had done one since 2009, which is ridiculous. I mean, if you think back of what things cost, you would 2009 versus what it is today, you have to be able to keep up with market. So then, again, we'll get into a little bit, but you'll see then again, the gap starts to widen just even in 1 year. So that's why we did another one in 2024. So there are different types of revals. So the one I talked about in 2022 was a full-blown reval. Totally full, all properties needed to go head to toe revaluation. The one we did in 2024 wasn't quite that detailed because we had just done it. So a lot of the properties were already where they needed to be with some minor market adjustments. Okay, so that's more of like a market update type of a reval. You're more or less trying to capture what the market is telling you, like those equalized value numbers. You're trying to capture those values. Now you have similar processes that take place in those revals, but a lot more detail, I would say, would be involved in a full revaluation as opposed to just a market update. Then you also have not a reval per se, but you have basically what we call a maintenance year. And a maintenance year would be, everything's pretty much status quo. We're going to take a look at all of the building type permits that might have been pulled. We might have seen some things on our own where maybe a deck was added, or maybe somebody sold a property and had some pictures taken on the inside of it, and we were like, well, we don't remember maybe a remodeled basement or a kitchen. And so we'll try to do some maintenance of the properties. But in a maintenance year, for the most part, unless you had some sort of renovation done in your home, your value is pretty much gonna stay the same. And that's what really was happening for about 12 years prior to the other reval. So, residential properties are evaluated, adjusted, and verified based on valid sales. When Lauri was giving her introduction or her bio earlier, she was talking about some of the duties that she does in the assessor's office, and that was one of the things that she does. She takes a look to make sure that when she sees sales data come in, that it's at arm's length, that it's very much a market sale, and then make sure that it's valid. Is that a valid sale that we want to then report to the Department of Revenue, that then takes a look at all those valid sales, and that's what they use to help determine what the equalized values are. So they're using data that we're providing, and then more or less extrapolating that data and using it to equate all the properties in the city. State's not coming down here and taking a look at every single one of our properties every single year. There's a method to the way they do things. So using valid sales is one of the ways. So Lauri also then wants to make sure that it's valid and it's comparable by style, size, bed, the same kind of things. I'm not comparing a 5-bedroom, 4-bath on a 2-acre lot to a 3-bedroom, 1-bath on a 1/4-acre lot. It just doesn't make any sense. It's not comparative. So you try to take a look at all of those sales throughout the whole city and make sure that they're comparative to each other when you're trying to place value in a market condition. Commercial properties are evaluated a little bit differently. The turnover isn't there in a commercial property like you see in a residential property. Well, number one, there's way more residential properties in the city than there are commercial properties, number one. But they just don't turn over that frequently. You don't see places where we're standing like this just flip owners every day, whereas you do in the residential market. It happens all the time. So you have a lot more data to work with on the residential side. On the commercial side, it's a little bit different. There are comparative sales of commercial properties. They're just harder to find. And so some of the methodologies that you might use here would be what we call an income approach. And so you're actually looking at income data off of that commercial property to help with the value of that property. And then one of the things that we talked about earlier on that state aids page of the tax bill, the value or the equalized value and assessed value from the city's perspective doesn't have a lot of impact when it comes to our state aids that the city gets. We have these revaluations and everything, and it doesn't change our shared revenue. That's a formula that's done by the state, and it doesn't really take into account what the equalized values are. I think the school district, it would have a bigger impact on them, but it really doesn't for us. Where it does have an impact, though, is it could have an impact on a minor impact on one of our state aids that we get because it's based on tax rate. So if our tax rate is reducing, and it's obviously going to have a little bit of an impact on that one particular called expenditure restricts. So one of the things that we always hear when we talk about revaluations is, great, my taxes are going up. My taxes are going up. That's wonderful. That's not necessarily the case when it comes to a reval. And the reason is because individuals will see their tax bill from last year. They're going to take their new amount that they just got on the reval, and they're going to try to plug that into the existing tax bill. That's not going to work because it's math. Okay, back to math. And so if we're looking at levies and assessed values, that's where your rate comes from. Okay, so a lot of times in a reval, you're going to see an increased total assessed value, which then again, if we're talking math, if you don't change your levy, your tax rate's going to come down. And so you can kind of think of it this way, if I have a $10 levy and $100 of assessed value, that's a 10% tax rate. Well, if I don't change my $10 levy, but now my assessed value is $200, my tax rate's now 5, not 10. But I'm still paying the same 10. So it's all about, really, it's all about the levy more than it is the reval. Okay, if that makes sense. Now, there's an argument to be made that says, yeah, but not everybody's value is going to increase at that same rate, and that's 100% true. 100% true. So in a reval year, you will have some people that end up paying more in taxes, so them saying, oh great, my taxes are going to go up. That's actually true. But you're also going to get the same about number of population of people that then say, hey look, I got a tax break. I'm paying less in tax. So if you kind of think of that bell-shaped curve, you got your extremes on the one end of each side, and you're pretty much, everybody's about in the middle, generally speaking, when it comes to revals. In that same scenario though, if you did add some to the levy, let's say I added $10 to the levy, or $5 to the levy, and still divided it, now you are paying a higher tax. That's just, you gotta pay the levy. And so that is true. Okay, questions on that piece before I get into further on this? Yes?
Are multifamily residential considered commercial?
Yes.
Over 3 units. So 1 to 3 units are residential, single family to up to 3 units. 4 and above is considered commercial.
Unless you follow federal law, because a veteran can take 4 and it's still considered a single home, they can have up to 5 units. There's a whole little thing with that.
I'll have a question later about
Okay.
how we assess
Oh,
those units.
perfect. All right, yeah, we'll get into that. So this is a chart that we put into our budget book every single year, and it shows a rolling 10-year history of the assessed values in the city, assessed and equalized value. And so in 2024, in the reval, we had an increase of 12.46% total citywide. Total citywide. The equalized value is on the far right-hand side, just short of the assessment ratio. That's that same calculation that we do on an annual basis that you see in the tax bill. You can see the year before, the 8792 is sitting right there. The direct tax rate, that's the city's tax rate only, that's not the mill rate. And so this bottom line here shows what the equalized values are by property type. And so then I just added a little bit of the assessment ratio to the bottom by type, and you can see that the total is 94.4. So we just did a reval, 2024, and we're still only at 94.4% of the market. So we're still under market value, and we just did a reval. A part of that is because we're using sales from the prior year to compare properties to. Assessment years are weird, I'm just gonna tell you right now. It's just kind of funky. So we're using some older sales data when we're doing our comparisons, which then ultimately is gonna put you kind of behind a little bit when the market is still on an incline. Now, if the market was starting to come down, you would ultimately then cross over and then you'd be right about that 100%, right where you want to be. You want to be at 1 or 100%. So we're still a little bit under, but nothing to get too worked up about. But you can see on that far right side, we were at 84, we were at 90.41, 84.74. So we knew we were heading into territory where we needed to do a reval. And so we could see the writing on the wall, we knew that was coming. That's when we did the reval in 2022. So that got us basically reset for the 1 every 5 years, but then we saw it start to slip again. We wanted to make sure to capture it. And so that's why we did another one in 2024.
Eric,
Yes?
do you have any idea how the 94.4 compares to comparable sized communities around the state?
You know, let's see. Don't have the equalized values on this chart. So I don't know explicitly the answer to that
What's your
question,
impression?
but I think we're pretty close. There's some municipalities that do a reval almost every single year. Now, we don't because it's too expensive, so we're not gonna do that. It doesn't cost us to pick up another 3 or 4, basis points. So, but I would say we're probably pretty close. So I circled this for a reason. So last year there was some legislation that came down that exempted personal property. Okay, so we went from 94 million in personal property assessed value to 0. So our total assessed values are now lower by $94 million. Well, you would think, well, that kind of stinks. It's going to make my tax rate go, up now because my assessed value just came down. Well, the legislator said, we understand that you guys are essentially going to lose tax revenue by exempting personal property. You're losing tax base. So they said that in order to make you whole, we're going to pay you a personal property aid exemption payment. And so we filed a return that basically told them what the value of all of our personal property tax was in the city. They took that across the whole state, broke it out into their little formula that they use for the amount that they appropriated in the state budget, and we're gonna get $707,000 in state aid for personal property exemption. So now, my tax rate isn't gonna skyrocket like I thought it was, because that comes straight off the levy. I can't levy for that anymore. It's a direct deduction in our levy for the amount of personal property aid we get from the state.
So is that a one-time?
It's in perpetuity. So it's at the same exact amount forever, until the legislator says it's not. So that's part of my challenges conversation is the reliance on state aids. It's wonderful when the state does things like this and they make you whole, and that's fantastic. It actually took a little bit of some work burden off of our assessor's department having to process all the personal property tax returns. The problem is that in good times, it's good. And in bad times, we don't know what's gonna happen. But they have the freedom to make changes to any state aid that they pay us. And so that's where I get nervous, okay? I'd rather not be reliant on state aids. I'd rather be able to have control over that myself, what little control we have on our levies. But I'd rather be able to control that myself. So that was a really big change in the way that we account for valuation in the city. So this is also a chart that shows up in our budget book on an annual basis. I threw this in last night just because I thought it was kind of neat. It's really a success story, frankly. But if you look at, this is the top 25 cities in the state of Wisconsin by population and then by assessed value, and it shows the municipal levy and the net tax rate, which is what we'll call the mill rate. Okay? So our total tax rate is 75571. The mill rate was 16.9. In 2015, in this same chart, the city of Beloit had the second highest rate in the state, second highest tax rate, and one of the lowest property values in the state. So now, if you fast forward to this year, we are now 11th in tax rate for the local tax rate out of 25, and 17th out of 25 in the total mill rate, which is like fantastic. So that's when you include the city, county, school district, Black Hawk Tech, okay? So collective effort, good job guys. So that's what that number shows, and I just wanted to highlight that just so that everybody can kind of see where the city is in relation to those top 25 cities in the state. And right now we're middle of the road. We have work to do, obviously, because if you look at the assessed values, I think it's still the lowest on the whole page, okay? Lowest on the page.
I think there's a bigger story that you can tell, because if you look at these 25 cities, there are only 2 on that list, Milwaukee and Racine,
Yep.
that have lower equalized values per capita than Beloit.
Yeah.
So in the course of reducing the tax rate,
Mhm.
that's not because we have increased our property values.
Right.
So
I mean, there's
that's a big
something to do
story.
with that, yeah. I mean, there is some value to increasing the total values. I mean, that is gonna reduce your rate, but yeah, there's work to be done on a per capita standpoint, for
Well, I
sure.
think it's a story to be told.
Yeah.
About responsibility.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so this chart, I just think is a nice chart. We have this in the budget book each year as well, but it's more that graphical representation. You can see the difference between equalized and assessed values. This gap is what I'm talking about. When we start to see those gaps occur, that's when we start to look and say, we need to capture that value. Okay, and that's, and over those last 5 years, the assessed values have increased 80%, and equalized values have increased 60%. So that's pretty significant. I mean, and that's, again, that's what the market was dictating. That's what it was telling us it was. And so that's what we're trying to capture there.
So
Yes?
really, what you're doing, you're capturing unregularized gains. So if in 2000 I buy a house for $100,000,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so let's say today you say it sells I'm going to build another one right next door to $300,000. But I bought it for $100,000. I pay my mortgage down,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
But then because they built a new house to me, you're going to when you reassess,
Mhm.
you're going to say that. Now here's my question. So
Yep.
what about the depreciation for the new roof and the new kitchen and all that stuff on this house that you have to do?
Yep.
So really your value would be, but you're trying to capture unrealized gains.
Yeah.
So what's that do to somebody that's over 65 and
Well,
Social Security?
what it would do, first of all, if you had a $100,000 house and you bought it 20 years ago,
Yeah.
we wouldn't, and somebody built the exact same house next to you, they wouldn't be the same value because of the reasons that you're talking about.
Okay.
Age comes into play when it comes to evaluating a property. So yeah, that's definitely a factor. So that's number one. So they would really never be assessed at the same amount. And two, similar to what we were talking about earlier, is like, well, if I'm doing a revaluation and I'm capturing a bunch of value, and your house is appraised or assessed at $100,000, and then we make an adjustment of some sort, say, I don't know, $50,000, so it goes up to $150,000. But if we're capturing all of that other value that's out there and increasing our assessed values by exponential amount of dollars, more so most likely than what 50% value in your home does, you would probably end up seeing a decrease in your property taxes. And that's what we saw in 2022. You had to have, like, I'm trying to remember what the exact numbers were. You had to have over 60% increase in your property value for you to see 1 penny more of tax dollar. Okay, it was significant. So now in some of those properties, someone's like, yeah, but mine went up 100%. I'm like, yeah, I know. Sorry, that's true. But yes, you also have to remember that not only did we do a reval, which raised the assessed value of all these other properties, we also did have a levy increase. We did increase the levy. So in some cases, no change. You're gonna pay more taxes because the city's always going to capture the net new construction value and increase the levy. I'm telling you right now, 100%, as long as I'm standing here as the finance director, I will always capture 100% of my net new construction.
Well, it's new construction too, I understand.
Yeah. So, so you have a little bit of that. So really, with that increase in assessed value during the reval, absent the increase in tax levy, you would pretty much have stayed status quo. And then this just shows where we've been from a local tax rate standpoint over the last 5 years. We were at 12.37, dropped to 7.72 in 2022, mostly because of the reval, but also we had a very successful TIF district that was out in the Gateway Business Park that closed, which added a bunch of value to the tax roll, which brought that tax rate down. Okay, so it was in conjunction with the reval and the closure of TID 10 that really had a tremendous impact on the local tax rate. There was significant tax savings from the local taxpayer when TID 10 closed. 2023, pretty much status quo. 2024, no TID closures. That was really the primary benefit of personal property exemption and the revaluation. That's really what drove the tax rate down in 2024.
Could I just,
Yes.
in terms of personal property tax, what personal property are we talking about?
Yeah, so personal property really does not impact residential properties at all. Residential property owners did not file personal property tax returns. That was commercial properties that did that. So it would have been desks and chairs and whatever, machines, patterns, yeah, things like that.
Hear about other states having personal property taxes on
Oh yeah,
car vehicles
yes,
and other
yes,
stuff.
yep, yes. It's one of the reasons why I was all in favor of personal property exemption. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense, but it didn't really give the residential property owners that tax break, really, that the commercial property owners ended up getting. But it did impact the rate, because we did reduce it from the levy. That's all I have. So we can, if you have explicit questions for Lauri that I can't answer, she's here, I'm here. We're here till whenever your questions are answered.
Is a majority of the personal property that normally shows up owned by properties within that closed TIF district?
No, I wouldn't say the majority.
Here's why
There was a lot.
Here's why I asked, because
Yeah.
you said yours is 700,000?
707,
He's
something.
gonna get like 280.
Yeah.
Clinton's gonna get 400,000, which
Yeah.
tells me it's Amazon and Staples where a bunch of it is.
Amazon was a lot of it. Yeah, Amazon was a lot. 17 million? I think Amazon was 17 million of the 94. Yeah, it was a good number. I mean, all right.
Yeah, I guess I was just wondering about the revaluation.
Yes.
The places that you saw increases in the residential, what neighborhoods or areas and what was driving that?
I don't know if I would say that it was an explicit neighborhood, really.
Yeah, okay.
Every neighborhood changed,
Okay.
but they weren't necessarily the same amount. It just really depended on what we saw, the sales in those neighborhoods reflecting. So there was some variation.
I think some of the, I'm gonna give you this just in case they can't hear you. I'll stand away from you in case there's feedback. I think a misnomer though when it comes to revaluations is that we looked at a couple of properties in a couple of different neighborhoods and then just unilaterally applied that percentage to all the properties. So let's make this easy. We're just gonna increase by 10%, or whatever the number is. And that's just not how it works. And just to be clear, when we do a revaluation, and when we make any change at all to any value of your property, you are notified. You're notified by mail through an assessment, assessment notice, okay, through the assessment notice. And not only does it tell you what the value is that we're now finding that property to be, it also tells you a methodology in which you can then take to appeal that value. Because it's not fair for us just to say, okay, your property just increased 50,000 and there's nothing you can do about it. There's a process, and it's laid out, and it's very clear, and we want that feedback. We want people to contact the assessor's office. We want to have a conversation about, why did you increase the value of my property? We can tell you exactly why. And we'll bring up the comparative sales, we'll bring up the structure of your home, we'll bring up all the other homes that we use to make that determination, and then we can have that conversation. If you don't like it, that's not the end of it. You can still take that a step further, and you can go to the board of review. The board of review is a board that's at the city. We hold it annually. We have to, and you can be heard. Now, there's certain things that you have to do as a property owner to prove the methodology that the assessor's office used is wrong. So the burden is kind of on the homeowner to prove that it's wrong, but the board can listen to that, and they can uphold that, they can make a change. They have the power to do that absent anything from city or city council. So they have that autonomy to do that. If you still don't like it, you can even take it a step further and go to the Department of Revenue.
Correct.
And appeal it even further. Okay? So there's things in place that do protect the property owners when it comes to revaluations and valuation of your property. Any other questions? We'll go here, and then Jeff.
Is the casino going to pay property tax?
The casino so the Ho-Chunk Nation owns land. Part of the land that they own has been placed on the federal registry that it's sovereign land. And so anything that's on that particular parcel of the sovereign land will be tax exempt. Any value that's on the non-sovereign land would be subject to the same property taxes that anybody else would be.
Well, how much is it sovereign land that's there?
Do you remember what the acreage is? Is it like 40?
I think so. There's a couple parcels, both maybe in that 28 to 40 range. I just can't remember the exact number.
I can't remember.
I can say that the proposed improvements are primarily on the sovereign land.
Yes. Any other questions here? You're good? Just a minute, sir. We'll go here.
When the new assessments came out, I'm wondering how many challenges you may have had that you expected or didn't expect.
So the question was, how many challenges did we have to the assessments? In 2022, it was more.
Yeah, I want to say we were about half of what we were in 2022, and I apologize for not knowing that exact number. In 2022, I want to say that we reviewed somewhere around 800 parcels through the open book process or board of review. Could have been, a few more or less, but somewhere around that many parcels. Some property owners had multiple parcels. This year, I want to say was, closer to 400. It might have been even a little bit below 400. So yeah, less than
A good number.
2022.
Yeah, fair number.
Sure.
Go ahead.
There is an agreement the city has with the casino.
Yes.
To provide services which we will get income from, of some nature.
Yeah. Yep. We have an intergovernmental agreement
Yeah.
with the nation that lays all that out. Jeff, do you have a question?
Beloit's residential value per person finally exceeded Milwaukee's, which is in free fall. Milwaukee City, you're seeing Beloit have very large percentages of rental properties. So do you see kind of a difference between owner occupied and rentals in your assessments? In any systematic way?
From a valuation standpoint?
Right.
You know, for single family rentals, I'm gonna say no, because they're competing, you know, owner occupants, if a property comes for sale and it's a rental property, you know, it's not just investors looking to purchase it, it's a potential owner user also. You know, so if it wasn't actively listed to any buyer, you know, there might be a difference in the sale price, but if it's actively listed for sale, we just don't really see a significant difference, because even though the motivations might be a little bit different from an investor purchase versus owner occupants, they're both vying for the same property.
So could you talk about, even though you don't do the commercial, but multifamily commercial in terms of how those valuations take place?
So with multifamily commercial properties, we're primarily using an income approach, and I don't do that specifically, but I understand that process. So we send out income and expense statements. We don't do it every year, but before a revaluation, we're certainly doing that. And so we get that information back, the assessor reviews it, and we compare it to what we have, you know, for rental data in terms of an income standpoint. What are these units in this property renting for compared to the overall market? So we'll go through an income analysis essentially where we have potential gross income, there's some vacancy taken off because there's a little bit of vacancy typically in properties. And then we review expenses to come up with what we call net operating income. And then that number gets capitalized with a rate that we've taken out of the market from other properties that have sold, where we also have that detailed income information. And we multiply that we divide that net income by this rate to give us a value. So that capitalization rate is essentially the relationship between income and sale price.
So I get my real question. There's some return to some multifamily rentals or tax credits, various kinds of income that flows to the owners but do not show up in rents.
So your question is, how does that impact the value?
My understanding is Section 42 tax credits are not counted as part of the income that you would assess.
So again, because I don't do that specifically, I can't say exactly how it's done, but my experience with Section 42 from my appraisal background is that there are different levels of rents potentially that are paid, but mostly Section 42, oftentimes a vast majority of those units are rented at market level. And buyers, while there's some differences in expenses, there's a little more compliance, a little more on the management side, there's not a huge difference between those capitalization rates that we see for a completely market rate complex versus Section 42. Now I don't know Section 8 or some of those other ones that actually receive subsidies they're subsidized for the rent that they don't collect from the tenant. I can't speak to exactly how those are valued just because I haven't gotten involved with that locally.
That's a Sam Monroe question.
Well, my understanding was that there was a state law at almost the same time that Watertower Place was built that exempted from the capitalization, the tax credits that flow to the owners.
So I also know with Section 42 that those tax credits can be sold.
They get sold.
And they also end at a certain time period, so
Yeah.
they're not always
They're not
directly
perpetuity, yeah.
applicable to the real estate either.
Yeah, a lot of it's the developer.
Right,
Sell the tax credits to help fund the project.
Right.
And usually the owners aren't the ones buying the tax credit.
But their income.
Yeah, to help pay for the property, to help pay for the development,
Right.
generally speaking, which then gets rolled up into, I mean, it doesn't get included in part of the value. the amount of construction cost is an element that is looked at, but Lauri explained it way better than me. Yes.
My question is about how you come to the assessed value. I know you're talking about the sales around, and I assume the size of the building.
Yep,
What
that's
else?
included.
And do you often get to go inside? I mean, what are the owner's rights?
As far as owner's rights, you have the right to decline an inspection. So I can only come into your property if you give me permission to do so. So, and that's why we, you know,
So
unfortunately.
guess?
We don't guess, but we can use the best information we have available otherwise. So if a property is sold, let's just say you've recently purchased your property, I send you a letter and you say, no, you know, I don't want you coming in. If I have data from the multiple listing service with photos or, you know, information from the realtor, who I assume went into the property, they'll provide photos, they'll provide some information. We can compare that to our records and make sure it matches. I sometimes try to make that phone call to the property owner. Again, they don't always take my calls. Or reach out to the realtor if I have questions about the property. Well, typically, we're only asking to come and see your property if you recently purchased it, if a permit has been taken out, let's say you build a deck, I'll call you up or I'll send a letter and ask if I can come out and measure the deck so we can get accurate information on our records. There are other reasons, maybe there's some question, you know, that I might send a letter out. Sometimes if the sketch of the property looks inaccurate from an aerial view I have, I might request the opportunity to come out and re-sketch the property. And property owners sometimes just ask me to, so that we have accurate data. But nobody has to do that. You know, nobody has to let me in.
That was a fairly recent law change that granted the property owner the ability to tell the assessor not to come on the property or inside the house. We used to have a mechanism then that said, okay, fine, if you don't let us in, we can put a value on it. I'm not saying we did this, just saying we can put a value on it. And since you didn't let me in the property, you can't appeal it. You can't come to board review. And so a lot of people let us in. They didn't want to take the chance, but that has since gone away. So even if you don't let us in, you can still appeal your decision through open book and through board review. Any other questions on anything we talked about today?
I'd like to say something.
Yes.
When they come into your house, they just do it to me. They really are just looking for the basics. They're really in and out. They're good people.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
you're right. Yeah, or just, I mean, of course, we're looking at condition and things like that, but, you know, it's primarily the room counts, the size, the amount of finish in the basement, or, you know, the typical features that affect value. But it's a pretty quick process. We try not to be real invasive, that's for sure.
She came to our house and found out we didn't have things that they had said we did, which we were telling her, no, we don't have that, that's not there. So she came out and saw, measured, and
that's what I really like about that open book process is it's just an informal conversation where you can come in and we can walk through your property description to make sure it's accurate. And again, if you want me to come out, great, and if you don't, at least I have a direct conversation with the property owner to understand that property a little bit better.
Do above ground pools make a difference?
No, we don't assess for above ground pools, just because they're easily dismantled. It's almost like what we call personal property item, so we don't assess for those. We also don't assess for fences, you know, and some other, you know, I don't want to say structure, but other improvements.
Anything else? All right, thank you.
So thanks to Lauri for bringing her special expertise. Of course, to Eric, he's gonna be doing his solo gig next month.
Yep.
And he promises to wow us with even more of the graphic design beyond the division
Now I
symbol
know.
and the equal sign. So we'll see you next month for that, and then check the website for other upcoming sessions.